The autumn wind swept across the dusty trading post like a harbinger of change, carrying whispers of desperation and broken dreams. In the makeshift auction square, where human dignity went to die under the merciless New Mexico sun, a crowd of rough men had gathered for what they called Damaged Goods Day. But none of them could have predicted what Cale Windwalker was about to do, something that would shatter their world and change two lives forever. Sarah Coleman sat in the back of a weathered wagon, her slender fingers wrapped around a small wooden bird her late mother had carved. 3 years had passed since the fever took her sight, leaving her in a world of endless darkness where she learned to navigate by sound, smell, and the cruel intentions of those around her. The rough voices of bidders surrounded her like vultures circling carrion, each word a reminder of how far she had fallen from the daughter of a respected schoolteacher to property being sold by a stepfather, drowning in gambling debts. "Gentlemen, what we have here is a rare opportunity," called out Bill Henderson, her stepfather, his voice thick with desperation disguised as salesmanship. "She's 22 years old, healthy as a horse despite the blindness, and trained in all the domestic arts, can cook, clean, sew, and she's quiet as a church mouse, never talks back, never complains. Hell, she might even be grateful for a man's attention after being alone so long." The assembled crowd erupted in coarse laughter that made Sarah's skin crawl. She had learned to read the subtle differences in men's voices, the ones who laughed with cruel amusement, the ones who chuckled with dark intent, and the ones whose silence spoke of even worse things. These men saw her not as a person, but as an object, a problem to be solved with enough coin. From his position on the rocky outcropping above the trading post, Cale Windwalker observed the scene with growing disgust. At 28, the Apache warrior had seen enough of white man's civilization to understand its capacity for casual cruelty, but this spectacle of human trafficking disguised as legal commerce made his blood run cold. The girl in the wagon carried herself with a dignity that her circumstances couldn't diminish, her spine straight despite her fear, her chin lifted despite her blindness. His Apache name, Cale Windwalker, had been earned during a vision quest when he was 16, after he had walked alone through a 3-day sandstorm and emerged with the wisdom that sometimes the greatest strength came from bending with the wind rather than fighting it. But today, he would not bend. Today, he would stand firm against an injustice that offended every value his grandmother had taught him about protecting the vulnerable. But the most shocking thing was what happened when the highest bidder made his move. Clayton Morrison stepped forward from the crowd, his massive frame casting a shadow across the auction platform. Known throughout the territory as a rancher with a taste for violence and a history of wives who mysteriously disappeared, Morrison dropped a heavy leather pouch on the makeshift table with the confidence of a man who expected to get what he wanted. $200, Morrison announced, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to owning people. "I'll take the blind girl off your hands, Henderson. Got a ranch that needs tending, and a woman who can't run away or cause trouble sounds perfect for my needs." Sarah's breath caught in her throat like a trapped bird desperate for freedom. Even in her world of darkness, Morrison's reputation had reached her ears through the whispered warnings of women in town. His first wife had allegedly died in a fall from their barn loft. His second wife had vanished during a harsh winter, leaving behind only blood-stained clothes that Morrison claimed belonged to a butchered deer. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. "I'll work harder. I'll do anything you ask. Just please don't." "Shut your mouth, girl," Henderson snapped, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of escaping his debts. "You're sold to Mr. Morrison here, and you'll be grateful for it. A blind woman has no business being choosy about her circumstances." Kyle's hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt, its bone handle worn smooth by generations of warriors who had wielded it in defense of the innocent. He had made a sacred vow to his dying father, Chief Standing Bear, that he would honor the ancient ways, protecting those who could not protect themselves, speaking for those who had no voice, standing against injustice regardless of the personal cost. And that's when everything changed forever. The warrior descended from the rocks like a shadow given substance, his moccasins making no sound on the hard-packed earth as he approached the crowd. Every step was calculated, precise, carrying the fluid grace of a predator who had learned to move through hostile territory without detection. His long black hair was adorned with eagle feathers that marked his status as a war chief's son, and the intricate beadwork on his buckskin shirt told the story of battles fought and victories won in defense of his people. When Cale spoke, his voice carried the authority of thunder rolling across vast plains and the quiet menace of a mountain lion defending its territory. The woman is not for sale. Every head in the crowd turned toward the voice like compass needles finding true north. Morrison's hand dropped instinctively to the gun at his hip, but something in the Apache's stance, perfectly balanced, ready for violence but not seeking it, made him hesitate. This was not some desperate brave looking for trouble or glory. This was a warrior who had seen real combat and emerged victorious, who carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove and everything worth defending. "You got no business here, Apache," Morrison snarled, though his voice carried less confidence than his words suggested. "This is a legal transaction between civilized folks. Move along before you find yourself dancing at the end of a rope." Kyle's dark eyes never wavered from Morrison's face, reading the man's intentions like tracks in fresh snow. Around his neck hung a necklace of bear claws and turquoise that marked him as descended from chiefs, and his arms showed the lean muscle of a man who had survived by strength, skill, and unwavering determination. "She chooses her own path," Kyle said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made several onlookers unconsciously step backward. "Not you. Not him." He nodded toward Henderson. "Her." Sarah turned her head toward the sound of his voice, confusion and desperate hope warring on her face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. In 3 years of blindness, no one had ever suggested she might have a choice in anything. Her world had become a series of commands and limitations, of being told what she could and couldn't do. Who are you?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been all morning, as if the simple possibility of choice had breathed life back into her spirit. Kyle stepped closer, his movements careful and non-threatening, designed to calm rather than intimidate. "Someone who believes a person's worth isn't measured by what they cannot see, but by the strength of their spirit, burning bright enough to light the darkest night." Henderson stepped forward, his face purple with rage and greedy panic. "Now you listen here, savage. I got legal papers on this girl, guardianship signed by a territorial judge. She's mine to do with as I please until I say otherwise, and I say she's sold to Mr. Morrison here." Kyle's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes like heat lightning on a distant horizon. Papers written by men who think they can own other human beings. Your law says slavery ended with your war, yet here you stand, selling a woman like cattle in an open market. But you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Without warning, Morrison lunged for his gun, his hand clearing leather with the practiced speed of a man who had drawn on others and lived to boast about it. But Cale moved like lightning itself, his reflexes honed by years of hunting and warfare where a moment's hesitation meant death. Before Morrison's weapon could rise more than inches from its holster, the Apache's blade was at his throat, its razor edge drawing a thin line of blood. "I wouldn't complete that thought," Kyle said quietly, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had killed before and would do so again without hesitation if necessary. "I've ended the lives of men for far less than what you plan to do to her." Morrison froze like a deer caught in a hunter's sight, feeling the cold steel against his skin and seeing his own death reflected in the Apache's dark eyes. Around them, the other men stepped back, their hands moving carefully away from their weapons as they realized they were witnessing something beyond their understanding or control. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring ready to snap. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried its lonely call, as if nature itself was bearing witness to this moment of reckoning. "Anyone else want to place a bid on a human being?" Kyle asked the stunned crowd, his voice carrying across the desert like a challenge thrown at the feet of God himself. Silence fell like a stone into still water. Sarah found her voice, and when she spoke, it carried a strength that surprised everyone present, including herself. I choose to go with him. The words hung in the superheated air like a prayer and a declaration of war combined. For the first time in 3 years of darkness and despair, Sarah Coleman had made a choice about her own life. Kyle slowly removed his blade from Morrison's throat, but his eyes never left the rancher's face. You heard her speak her will freely given. The choice is made, and it will be honored. Morrison's face twisted with rage and humiliation. This ain't over, Apache. That girl's marked for death out here in the wilderness. And so are you. The territorial government don't take kindly to Indians stealing white women. Kyle turned toward Sarah, extending his hand palm upward in the universal gesture of offering help without demanding acceptance. Can you ride a horse, Sarah Coleman? She nodded quickly, then hesitated. But I can't see the stirrups or judge the horse's temperament or know which way we're heading once we start moving. I'll be your eyes, he said simply, his voice carrying a gentleness that seemed at odds with the deadly warrior who had just faced down armed men. If you'll trust me to guide you safely. Wait, don't miss this crucial detail. As Cale helped Sarah onto his magnificent paint stallion, a horse that had carried him through countless battles and across endless miles of frontier wilderness, Morrison struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his throat. The humiliation of being bested by an Apache in front of other white men burned in his chest like acid. You think you're some kind of hero, Apache? Morrison spat, his voice thick with hatred and wounded pride. That girl's worth less than the horse you're stealing her on. She's damaged goods, useless baggage that'll slow you down and get you both killed before the week is out. Kyle settled Sarah in front of him on the saddle, his strong arms creating a protective circle around her trembling form while maintaining a respectful distance. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, the careful way he adjusted his position to ensure her comfort and security before considering his own needs. Then you clearly don't understand how to recognize what's truly valuable in this world, Kyle replied, his voice carrying a quiet dignity that made Morrison's crude words seem even more petty and small by comparison. As they rode away from the auction site at an easy pace that wouldn't jar or frighten his passenger, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since before the fever took her sight: genuine safety. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the warmth of Cale's chest against her back, the way he quietly warned her of low-hanging branches or sudden changes in terrain, all of it spoke of a consideration she had never known existed. Behind them, Henderson's voice rose in fury, carried on the desert wind. She'll be nothing but trouble, Savage. You'll see. That girl's cursed, marked by God himself for suffering and sorrow. But his words were quickly lost in the vastness of the high desert, swallowed by wind and distance, and the sound of hoofbeats carrying two souls toward an uncertain but infinitely more hopeful future. Why? Sarah asked as the trading post disappeared behind them, and the sun climbed higher in a sky she could no longer see but could feel warming her face like a benediction. Why did you help me? You don't even know me, and your people have every reason to hate mine for what we've done to you. Kyle was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief and hard-won wisdom. My sister was born with a withered arm, he said simply. She was the most beautiful person I ever knew, and she saw more beauty in this harsh world than anyone with perfect sight and perfect limbs. She taught me that what others call weakness is often just a different kind of strength waiting to be recognized. His voice caught slightly, and Sarah felt his chest tighten with remembered pain. When the soldiers came to force our people onto the reservation, I couldn't save her. The long march in winter, the disease that followed, it took her, along with so many others who deserved better. But today I could save you, and maybe that's enough to honor her memory. Sarah felt tears she hadn't shed in months begin to fall. No one has ever cared about what I wanted before, she whispered. I was just a problem to be solved, a burden to be passed along to whoever would take me off someone else's hands. Everyone deserves the right to choose their own path, Kyle said, his voice firm but gentle. My sister taught me that being different doesn't make someone broken. It makes them see the world in ways others cannot. And sometimes that different vision is exactly what the world needs most. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what happens next. As they made camp that first night under a canopy of desert stars, Kyle moved around their small fire with quiet efficiency. But unlike other men Sarah had known, he narrated his actions, describing where he was placing their supplies, what sounds meant what, painting verbal pictures of the landscape around them so she would never feel lost or helpless. The fire is about 6 feet to your left, he explained as he arranged their simple camp. I've spread a blanket here for you to sit on, and there's a flat rock behind you if you want something to lean against. Our horses are picketed about 20 feet to your right, and there's a small creek just beyond them where I filled our water skins. Sarah had never heard the world described so vividly through words alone. Kyle painted pictures with language, the way flames danced against the velvet darkness, the colors that streaked the sky as the sun disappeared behind distant mesas, the silhouettes of ancient cacti standing like sentinels against the star-filled heavens. My sister taught me to see with words, he explained softly, his voice carrying the warmth of cherished memory. She said the world was twice as beautiful when you painted it with language for someone who couldn't see it with their eyes. For 3 days, they traveled deeper into Apache territory, moving through landscape that grew more rugged and beautiful with each mile. Sarah's other senses, already sharpened by years of blindness, seemed to grow even more acute in the clear desert air. She could smell rain coming from 50 miles away, could tell by the echo of their horses' hooves what kind of terrain they were crossing. On the morning of the 4th day, Sarah's supernatural hearing picked up something that made her blood run cold, the distant sound of multiple horses moving fast through the desert, their hoofbeats creating a rhythm that spoke of deliberate pursuit rather than casual travel. They're coming, she whispered urgently, her head turning toward sounds still too distant for Kyle to detect clearly. Multiple riders, at least 5 or 6, pushing their horses hard through the heat. They've been following our trail since before dawn. Kyle's respect for her abilities had grown with each passing hour. He had already learned that her blindness had sharpened her other senses to levels that seemed almost mystical. She could identify different types of rock formations by the way sound echoed off them, could sense the emotional state of animals by subtle changes in their breathing. The confrontation came with the sudden violence of a summer thunderstorm. Morrison rode into the narrow canyon where they had taken shelter, leading a posse of 5 hard-faced men whose intentions were written in the weapons they carried and the rope coiled on Morrison's saddle horn. "Come out, Apache!" Morrison's voice echoed off the canyon walls like the roar of an angry god. "You got something that belongs to me, and I aim to collect it, along with your scalp for the trouble you've caused me." Kyle stepped out from behind the red rocks that had concealed their position, his rifle ready but not yet aimed, offering his enemies one final chance to choose wisdom over violence. The only thing here that belongs to anyone is her freely given choice to live as she sees fit. Honor that choice, and ride away in peace. Morrison's laughter rang harsh and bitter off the canyon walls. Honor? From a savage who steals white women and corrupts them with heathen ways? The only honor here comes from the barrel of a gun and the justice of a rope around your neck. The battle erupted with explosive violence that echoed through the canyon like thunder trapped between stone walls. When the gun smoke finally cleared and the echoes of violence faded into desert silence, 3 of Morrison's men lay dead among the red rocks. Morrison himself had taken a bullet through the shoulder, but remained alive, though barely conscious. The 2 surviving members of his posse had fled. Kyle knelt beside Sarah, crimson seeping from a graze along his left shoulder where a bullet had come close enough to tear his shirt and burn his skin. "Are they gone?" Sarah asked, her hands immediately moving to examine his injuries with gentle precision. "I can help you," she said, her voice calm and competent despite the violence that had just ended around them. My mother was a healer and midwife before she died. She taught me everything she knew about treating wounds and fighting infection with natural remedies. And you won't believe what happened next. As Sarah tended to Kyle's wounds with skill that would have impressed a trained physician, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had learned to navigate the world entirely through touch, he began to understand something profound about the woman fate had brought into his life. This person, whom others dismissed as damaged goods, possessed capabilities that went far beyond what any of them could imagine. Her touch was sure and gentle as she cleaned his wounds with water from their precious supply. She directed him to gather specific plants from the canyon floor, medicinal herbs she identified purely by their scent and texture, plants that would prevent infection and accelerate healing when properly prepared. "How do you know all this?" Kyle asked quietly, watching her work with growing amazement and profound respect. Sarah smiled for the first time since he had known her, a real smile that transformed her entire face. When you lose one sense, the others don't just become stronger, they become partners in survival. But more than that, when you've lived in darkness, you learn to find light in knowledge, in skill, in being useful to others when they need you most. As she worked, binding his wounds with strips torn from her own petticoat, she told him about her mother's teachings, the healing properties of different desert plants, how to read a fever through touch alone, the subtle signs that indicated whether a wound would heal cleanly or develop infection. 6 months later, in a hidden canyon where Kyle's band had found temporary refuge from increasing military pressure, Sarah had become something no one could have predicted when they first saw her trembling in that auction wagon, their healer, their teacher, their bridge between the old world and the new, and the beating heart of a community learning to survive against impossible odds. The Apache women, initially suspicious of this blind white woman their war chief's son had brought among them, gradually came to recognize her extraordinary gifts. She could diagnose illnesses by scent and touch that their traditional healers missed, could locate internal injuries that showed no external signs, and could treat conditions with a combination of her mother's knowledge and their ancestral wisdom. More than her healing abilities, Sarah had become their teacher and cultural ambassador. She learned their language with astonishing speed, her acute hearing allowing her to master subtle pronunciations that escaped others. In return, she taught the children English and basic arithmetic, skills that might help them navigate an increasingly complex world. Kyle often watched her moving through their camp with the confidence of someone completely at home in her environment, her laughter ringing across the canyon as children gathered around her for stories that blended Apache legends with tales from her own childhood. The woman who had once been offered for sale like livestock had become the center around which dozens of lives revolved. One evening, as they sat together beside the communal fire, listening to the night sounds of the desert coming alive around them, Sarah spoke the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Taking me away from that auction, bringing danger to your people, making yourself a target for men like Morrison who won't stop hunting us?" Kyle considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "Do you regret choosing to come with me instead of accepting the life they had planned for you?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "When I was sitting in that wagon, listening to those men discuss my value like a piece of livestock, I thought about dying," she admitted. "I thought about how easy it would be to just stop fighting, stop trying to survive in a world that had decided I was worthless." She reached out in the darkness and found his hand with unerring accuracy. "But then you appeared and gave me something I had never possessed before. Choice. Not just the choice to leave that place, but the choice to discover who I could become when I wasn't being told constantly what I couldn't do." "You saved me too," Kyle said, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I was becoming bitter, angry at a world that seemed determined to destroy everything I loved, ready to fight and die just for the sake of fighting. You reminded me what we're truly fighting for, not just survival, but the right to live with dignity, to choose our own paths, to protect what's beautiful and worth preserving in this world. The woman the world had tried to sell had become the one who saved them all. If this story of courage and unexpected love moved your heart, if it reminded you that even in the harshest circumstances, human dignity and connection can triumph over cruelty and despair, then you've found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of redemption, resilience, and romance that defies every boundary society tries to build. From dusty trails to whispered promises under starlit skies, every story we tell reminds us that true strength often emerges from the most unexpected places. This is where the frontier-tested souls and hearts discovered what it truly means to find home.